إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله وقولوا قولا سديدا يصلح لكم أعمالكم ويغفر لكم ذنوبكم ومن يطع الله ورسوله فقد فاز فوزا عظيما. أما بعد, we start in the name of Allah the Most High, the one to whom belongs all praise, the one who controls all affairs, the one who gives, the one who takes, glorified and exalted is He. And we send peace and blessings upon the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam and his family and his followers until the end of time. Ameen. I want to spend a little bit of time today kind of expounding on one angle of one portion of a verse that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions in different ways in the Quran, and then a hadith that's related to it. And the portion of that verse is وَلَوْلَا دَفْءُ اللَّهِ النَّاسِ بَعْضُهُمْ بِبَعْضٍ لَفَسَدَتِ الْأَرْضُ وَلَكِنَّ اللَّهَ ذُو فَضْلٍ عَلَى الْعَالَمِينَ. And in this statement, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, if it were not for Allah repelling the people one by the other, there would have been great corruption in the earth, but rather Allah is full of bounty towards His creation, subhanahu wa ta'ala. So essentially what this verse is telling us is that there is, we could say, a universal cosmic order, so to speak, that relates to the interaction between things on a macro level and on a micro level. On a macro level, we can think about this in the relationship between entities, for example, in commerce, or in politics, or in any number of different categories. That this group of people becomes a means by which another group of people is stopped, or another group of people is altered, or held into control, or whatever it might be. And we can also look at this on a micro level, that we in our communities, we're in need of one another, and the consequence of being together is what actually helps us to become better. And we learn about this in a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, which is not the one that we're going to go into a lot of detail on, but one that has come up before, where the Prophet ﷺ, he said, المؤمن الذي يخالط الناس ويصبر على أذاهم خير من الذي لا يخالط الناس ولا يصبر على أذاهم. That the believer who interacts and exchanges with the people and has patience, literally, and has patience over the harm that comes as a result of it, is better than the one who does not interact with the people and have patience over their harm. And so this is a guiding principle from the life of the Prophet ﷺ, which pushes us to come together. Because the reality is, in being together, we face difficulties that we wouldn't face otherwise. It's really easy to be patient while you're sitting by yourself doing nothing. It's a lot more difficult to be patient when you're engaging with other people. And this is why the Prophet ﷺ also mentioned in the hadith that the one who has good character can reach the level of the one who prays in the night and fasts during the day. Why? Because the one who's praying in the night and fasting during the day, they're struggling against themselves for the most part. But the person who has good character is struggling against everything else that's around them. And so in that communal relationship, we have a refinement that occurs. In our family lives, we have a refinement that occurs. And this is absolutely essential to the religion of Islam. That the whole point of this thing is not, to engage in some really superficial actions, or to be unconscious of our own thoughts and unconscious of our own beliefs, but it's really to hold ourselves accountable. And the fruits of the religion do not actually show themselves unless we hold ourselves accountable. So in that, there is a refinement that occurs. And Allah then repels some people by others. I can say for sure in my life, there's things that I would not have learned if it wasn't for the mistakes that I've made in public in front of other people and them telling me about it. It just doesn't happen otherwise. And so that idea right there is what we want to spend some time on. The hadith of the Prophet ﷺ where he said, "Ad-deenu an-nasiha." that the entirety, the literal wording of the hadith, it's a wording by which there's added emphasis on the point. So it's uslub al-qasr in the Arabic language. So this he's saying, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, the entirety of the religion is surrounded by this gate of nasiha, this gate of advice and sincerity, which means that encompasses the whole thing. Right? And it's, again, an expression that it adds extra emphasis. So they said, فَقَالُوا لِمَنْ يَا رَسُولَ اللَّهِ. We said, to who, Ya Rasulullah, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam? We're supposed to have this nasiha. We have to talk about the word, what it actually means. We're supposed to have that. Who are we supposed to have it to? And he said, لِلَّهِ وَلِكِتَابِهِ وَلِرَسُولِهِ وَلِأَئِمَّةِ الْمُسْلِمِينَ وَعَامَّتِهِمْ. To Allah and to His book and to His messenger and to the leaders of the Muslims and to the general population of the Muslims. So what is this nasiha? Nasiha is a really interesting word, because one of its origins is what really kind of gives us a flavor for it. And language is extremely important. Now, we don't always give enough emphasis to language. Language is extremely important, not only for what it means to us and how we think about things, but also for how other people understand those things, and also for how the worlds that we create in our minds. Because these words are not they're not lines that you draw in the sand type thing. They're images. And so nasiha comes from a root meaning of actually putting the thread through the eye of the needle. Right? Putting the thread through the eye of the needle. If you want to really get a feel for nasiha and what it's supposed to be, go home and do that. Because these things, it's all nice and intellectual up here, but our religion is actually supposed to be experienced and lived. So you want to get a real idea for what nasiha is, go home and take out a bunch of needles and get some thread and just sit there and thread the needles one after the other and see how difficult it is. Because the idea here, nasiha, is a word that combines multiple meanings. One of them is sincerity. This is a primary meaning. And another meaning is advice. So what does it mean? When you give nasiha to someone, there's a sincerity and a delicacy and the accuracy that's needed to put the thread through the needles. That's what it is. That's what it means to give nasiha. The first part of the hadith is not the point today. But to Allah and to His messenger and to His book essentially means to be sincere to those things. We don't actually advise Allah's book and His messenger and so on. That's why it's important to understand the word. But we can be sincere to them by following their commands, by learning about them, so on and so forth. And then when it comes to the end, it says to the leaders of the Muslims, which maybe will be another day as well, and to the generality of the Muslims, the general populace. So what this hadith is saying is that we have a communal responsibility to one another to advise one another in this way, like the threading of the eye of the needle. One of the things that this emphasizes as an underlying point is that is the nature of the community of the believers. But what does it require? It requires that the individuals who make up that community are more concerned about truth and more concerned about their journey towards realization and improvement than they are about their own personal desires. Because usually what's the first thing that happens when someone gives us advice? There's no way to put words to it. That's what happens. Someone gives you advice, the first thing that happens, like that, you puff up. And we start to get defensive and we start to it just ends up in this little back and forth that doesn't go anywhere, right? So the community of people, and sometimes that's because the advice is given in the wrong way. We accept that. We'll talk about that too. But the community of people has to be more dedicated to truth than they are to themselves. That's one of the principles of the community of the believers. That's why Allah tells us in the Quran that, "O you who believe, stand up for justice, even if it's against yourselves and against your loved ones." Right? And if it's a poor person or a rich person, doesn't make any difference. If it's truth, it's truth. Right? So we have to really get a hold on our nest, on our ego, and on ourselves. So what are some guidelines then for the person who's giving the advice? I'm going to say 5 guidelines for the person who's giving the advice, and a couple points for the person who's receiving the advice in the second half of the khutbah, inshallah. Point number 1 for the person who's giving the advice. And this is an extremely important point. Point number one, make sure that you actually understood the situation. Okay? Some people are smiling because they know what it's like to have been on the receiving end probably of that kind of advice. Number one is make sure you actually understand the situation. Countless times I've dealt with cases where people who are upset about something, and as you start to talk to them about it and work through it, you realize that they didn't even actually understand the situation properly. They're upset about something that didn't even happen. A lot of times that's what happens. I'm going to go and tell so-and-so that what they did was wrong and such. But did you even understand correctly if that's what happened? This is the first issue. And that might mean asking some clarifying questions. Like, I understood from you this. Is that what you meant? Or it seemed to me that this is what happened. Is that what was actually going on? So on and so forth. This is pre-advice. That's just to understand if what happened was truly correctly understood. Right? And this is extremely important. And because our perceptions are not always what we think they are. There's an excellent classical American movie. Oh my God, what is it called? And you can't talk in a khutbah, so that makes a problem. I think it's 12 Angry Men. You might know it. The one about the jury. It's an old American movie. It's excellent. It shows you this idea, and there's of course tons of psychological studies on it. But it shows you this idea that our perceptions are not always accurate. We don't always understand the whole story. We don't necessarily get it the way that we're supposed to. One of the stories, of course, that Rumi tells about that, we've talked about before, which really clarifies it too. That the village of blind people, that the elephant came in, and everyone wanted to go see the elephant, but they're all blind. So each of them go and they see the elephant, and they see by touching the elephant, and they come back afterwards and they go to talk about it. They're like, so what happened? What was the elephant like? And this one's like, it's long and it's slender. And the other one asks, what is the elephant like? And it's circular and it's wide. He felt the ears. The first one felt the trunk. And then the other one felt the leg. And all of them were like, no, you're all wrong. But it's all the same elephant. Right? So perceptions aren't always correct. We have to analyze that. This is step number one. This is an important principle for everything in life. Because we cause ourselves a whole lot of stress, oftentimes, around things that are not even properly understood. So that's number one. Number two is to make sure that the thing that you're correcting someone on is actually something that needs to be corrected. Okay, so it's a little bit different than number one. Now, assuming you actually perceived it properly, is that thing something that needs to be corrected? The principle in Islamic law is that the only thing that you correct is something that is universally agreed upon to be unacceptable. That's the thing that needs to be corrected. Everything else is in the body of maybe depends on the situation. But what are the things that actually need to be corrected? Things that are universally not acceptable. So I'll give you a practical one that happens in communities a lot. Someone will come into the masjid and they see that the row is already filled. And they're the only one that comes in. And they go and they pray by themselves in the next row. And then someone will come afterwards and they'll tell them, brother, you're supposed to pull somebody back and make a row so that you're not praying by yourself. That's true according to the majority opinion. But it's not true according to every opinion. There's an opinion in the Maliki school that if you're concerned that people won't understand what you're doing and it will cause more harm than benefit, you can pray in the row by yourself. So now, is this something that you actually correct the person on? Probably not. Right? Maybe you can have a discussion on it, but it's not something that you correct. So you have to understand in the beginning, am I actually correcting something that's universally agreed upon to be not allowed in Islam? And that's why many people talked about, the real priority for correcting is with the people of knowledge. It's not with the regular people. Because a lot of times they don't actually understand. They think something's the way that it is, but it's actually not. They think it's agreed upon, you can't do it, but it's actually not agreed upon. And this causes a lot of problems, especially in a community that's extremely diverse. Because people might be doing acceptable things, but you're just not accustomed to it. So then, for example, they come to Salah and the person, the ankle is not touching the next person's ankle. And that's so important that we need to be correcting it all throughout the Salah. No. At least the majority opinion is that you don't do that. Let alone the whether or not the minority exists, that's a different issue. But these are not things that need to be corrected all the time. We're talking about like, you see someone and they're out and they're oppressing somebody. This is something you need to correct them on. You see somebody, if you understood it properly. You see somebody and they're like, I don't know, doing drugs. Probably something you should talk to them about. You see somebody and they're abusing their spouse. Probably something you should talk to them about. So on. These are the kind of issues you're talking about. So this is number 2. Number 3 is assess the quality of your relationship with the person. The principle, as I've said over and over before, is connect before you correct. Connect before you correct. Assess your relationship with the person. How is the landing going to be? In like activism talk, they talk about your intent and your impact. Or what is it going to land like? When you throw the advice, what is it going to land like? Is it going to land like that, or is it going to land very softly and nicely and so on? So assess the relationship. Is this someone I should actually be giving advice to? Maybe I should get to know their name. Maybe I should ask myself why I've never seen them in the masjid before. Maybe that's a higher priority than X, Y, Z. Number 4 is to get our emotions out of it. So the person who's giving the advice, number 4 is to get your emotions out of it. Why? Because a lot of times when we're giving our advice, it's not because we actually care about the other person. It's because it's upsetting us and we want to get it out. So now I'm just going to throw it out of myself onto the other person without any consideration for whether or not it will be beneficial. So we have to control our own emotional response. And if we're finding it really outrageously difficult to control our own emotional response, that's something we need to think about for ourselves. We need to give ourselves some advice. Like maybe I need to figure out why I'm so emotional about this thing. And it could be very reasonable. Like maybe there's some trauma, maybe there's some family history, maybe there's some personal issues, whatever it might be. And then we need counseling and we need therapy and everything else. There's no aib in that. But there might be real issues that are unresolved. Right? So number 4 is to get the emotions out. Number 5 is to do it privately. Now there are exceptions to that. If someone's like, stands up right now, la qadr, and hits someone else in the musalla, we kind of have to stop them and give them advice right now. It's not, we can't like wait till afterwards and be like, brother, I didn't want to tell you in public, even though you were oppressing the other person in public. Right? But the general rule is that we tell people the advice that we need to give them in private. We sit with the person, talk to them, make sure the circumstance is okay, so on and so forth. So number 1, just to review, understand the situation. Number 2 is to know that it's something that needs to be corrected. Number 3 is to assess the relationship. Number 4 is to get our emotions out of it. And number 5 is to do it privately. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم فاستغفروه إنه هو الغفور الرحيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. There's a dua request for Vasi Siddiqui. He's in critical condition. Allah give him shifa and Allah make things easy for him and his family. Ameen. And also brother Shahid Naeem passed away last Monday and was buried yesterday from Tarzana. Allah have mercy on him and make things easy for him and his family. As always, when I'm here once a month, we have the evening program. And then the class in the morning tomorrow. So this evening, let me just say a word about that. This evening we'll be starting a book. And the reason why I want to do this book in the community lectures is because I feel that this book is something that has to be known by the entire community in order to build community. So it needs to be done publicly over time, and it's the book Islamic Manners by Sheikh Abdul Fattah Abu Ghudda, Allah yarhamah. This is truly a remarkable book. It's not very long, but it's very important. And in having that shared knowledge, then we're able to understand what to expect from one another and how to deal with one another. Interestingly enough, we made the intention last month to start this book tonight, and I was reading the news this morning and came across the piece of information that actually Sheikh Abdul Fattah, Allah yarhamu, died 21 years ago today, on today. And he was a great and phenomenal scholar, and we could spend 10 khutbahs talking about his life, but that's not the point of this khutbah. Allah have mercy on him and elevate his rank. Tomorrow morning also for the morning class at 7:30 at the masjid, this month we're starting a new book. So alhamdulillah, we accomplished what we've been seeking to accomplish in terms of over the last couple years. We wanted to study Aqidah, and we wanted to study fiqh, and we wanted to study spiritual development at the most basic level to cover the individual obligation of every single Muslim. Alhamdulillah, we finished those 3 subjects now at the basic level. So now next month, which is tomorrow, we're starting a new text. And we'll be doing the spiritual aphorisms of Ibn Ata'illah as secondary, inshallah, for anyone who wants to attend. Rahimahullah ta'ala. To close the khutbah, inshallah. So go back to nasiha, giving advice. We already talked about the responsibilities of the one who's giving the advice. Just want to make 3 quick points about the one who's receiving. Okay. Number 1 is that we have to train ourselves from now to be people who can receive advice. It's countercultural in many ways, and it's counter-nafs in many ways. Like our ego doesn't make it easy to accept advice. So we have to think about that from now. To know that we're not perfect, that we make mistakes, that things don't always go the way we want them to go. Sometimes we have bad days and they have consequences, whatever it might be. But I am in need of the advice of others. Right? And to recognize that will help us to be people that can accept it when it comes. Number 2 is that we have to surround ourselves with people who will give us advice. One of the most dangerous things we can do in life is to surround ourselves with an echo chamber, or to surround ourselves with groupthink, and those who will only tell us that what we're doing is wonderful and great, and never question us on anything, and never hold us accountable for anything, and always agree with us on every single thing. That's a really dangerous place to be. And what's sad about that is our modern reality. Because people get their news, for example, on Facebook. Like that's people's general, they get their news on social media. And their social media is curated to be everyone who agrees with them. So, I mean, in the first place, your whole world is like actually just, it's curated that way. Which is a really scary thing. Right? So we have to surround ourselves with people who will be honest and truthful and caring and loving and merciful and compassionate towards us. This is number 2. Number 3 is when the advice comes, the only thing that really matters is for the receiver. The only thing that really matters for the receiver is there truth in this? Why do I say that? We have to separate the 2. Our job in receiving advice is not to criticize the person who gave it to us and whether or not they filled all the conditions of the person who's supposed to give it. That's their problem. My problem is there truth in this or not? And am I going to be able to follow it? That's the question. So they give it to me in a way that's not very nice, they give it to me in a way that's not acceptable, they give it to me in a way that's humiliating. All of that is bad, right? But it doesn't change the question though, is it true? So the primary question when someone comes to us with something is it true? And then of course secondary relating to that are issues of how do I do something about it, and so on and so forth. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us people of sincerity, and to make us people of counsel and mutual counsel and benefit to one another. Allah, forgive us of our sins and our shortcomings, accept from us our deeds, enter us into paradise and keep us away from your displeasure. Allah, give food to those who are hungry, give shelter to those who are shelterless, give victory to those who are oppressed. Oh Allah, give us knowledge that benefit us and benefit us from that which you have taught us. Allahumma ighfir lana dhunubana wa israfana fi amrina wa thabbit aqdamana. Allahumma barik fina wa baynana wa alif bayna qulubina wa sufufina. Allahumma kun ma'ana wa la takun alayna. Unsur ikhwana al-mustada'afina fi kulli makan. Iftah alayhim ya fattah ya alim. Allahumma alimna ma anfa'na wa anfa'na bima 'allamtana wa zidna ilman wa 'amalan salihan. Allahumma ballighna Ramadan. Allahumma ballighna Ramadan. Allahumma ballighna Ramadan. وصلى الله وسلم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا وأقيموا الصلاة. And please make as much room as possible for those in the back.